Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Entrepreneurial Masterclass with Paul Swinton. This masterclass is in partnership with Scottish Health Innovations Ltd, and it's a part of a series of events we're organising this week for Entrepreneurship Week. Here today we have Brian McNichol, Head of the Centre for Entrepreneurship, Linda McSwigan, Enterprise Lead for the School of Health Sciences, Chris Lim from DJCAD, and of course Paul Swinton, our speaker for today. Paul is an air ambulance paramedic for the Scottish Air Ambulance Division in Glasgow, and he is involved in critical care and working alongside trauma teams and medical retrieval services of Scotland. He is also actively developing, partnering, and collaborating to further enhance the performance of emergency airway management as far and wide as possible through his ventures as an entrepreneur, which is what he'll be sharing today here in this masterclass. I will give the word to Brian now so that we can begin without further ado.
Thank you. I think we're going to have a short slide from Chris first. Is that there? Yeah, I'll pass on to Chris Lim just before we get going. There's an exciting new course going to be starting in September, but I'll let Chris start about that.
Right. Thank you, Brian. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon in the Healthcare Masterclass organized by the Centre of Entrepreneurship. Welcome, Paul, to the session. My name is Chris Lim, and I'm a senior lecturer here at the University of Dundee School of Art and Design, or otherwise known as DJCAD. I have something to share with you today, and I'll promise it will only take a minute. So in September this year, we'll be launching an exciting new Masters in Science called the Design for Healthcare. It's led by the School of Art and Design, and this partnership is, this is in partnership with the School of Medicine and the School of Health Sciences, which makes this unique interdisciplinary collaboration, as far as I'm aware, the first in the world. So we take a human-centered design approach, and our curriculum includes design thinking, service prototyping, user research, healthcare and well-being literacy, leadership and change. And there will be opportunities for live project briefs and working collaboratively with healthcare professionals. We are accepting full-time applications to this program, and if you are passionate about healthcare and design, why not check out our website and speak to my colleagues or myself to find out more. Our email addresses are on the slide, and so thank you for listening in and enjoy the rest of the masterclass.
Thank you, Chris. And I know there's some great stuff going on at Duncan Johnson around design innovation and how it can make change and for new business ideas or improving public services and so on. It's crucial to have this design thought process put into place. And Paul, today, our celebrated speaker, has got a fantastic journey to share with you all. He's not a traditional entrepreneur, he's an inventor, but he's embraced a design thinking approach without probably even realising it until now when he's reflected back. And he's been an air ambulance paramedic for the last, coming up for 11 years now. So he's got a really powerful story to share. And we hope that today's masterclass will inspire those of you, particularly within the health sciences arena, that throughout your career, if you spot an opportunity, something that you think could be changed or fixed, there's a clear pain point, that today's masterclass will give you a lot of inspiration that could actually be done. And Paul's going to explain basically how he managed to bring a really exciting product to market based on his experience as an air ambulance paramedic. So I'm going to pass over to Paul now. Welcome to the masterclass, Paul. We're delighted to have you. I'm going to share your slides, and then I think you're going to take us through your journey with your business idea. So I'm going to, I think you should all see the screen now. And a few quick requests. Paul, oh sorry, I just need to do one thing. I'll do that one more time. Right. If you try that now. Okay, so I think, Paul, you should have control now. You can make it full screen.
Yeah, 2 seconds.
Okay, good. I think
There we go.
over to you, Paul.
Can you see it okay?
Yes.
Great. Good day, everyone. So we'll just get into it. So you have an idea. How do you take that idea from just being an idea to a commercial product and brand that enhances patient care both locally and internationally? Hi, my name is Paul Swinton. I'm an air ambulance paramedic, entrepreneur, and inventor of SCRAM, which stands for Structured Critical Airway Management, that is used during airway emergencies and is now a commercial product and brand used in the UK and other parts of the world. I'll just try and move on. Brian, you might need to move it on, mate. Oh, there you go. It's moving now. What I'd like to do today is to share with you my experience in developing SCRAM and how I moved from an idea to what is now a commercial product. What you see in front of you is an overview of the 5 stages of product development that I went through. And often it all starts with an idea, then moves on to concept development, marketing strategy, prototyping and testing, and then on to commercialization. Now, in the ideal world, this is a linear process, but in reality, this is not a linear exercise. You'll start with the idea, move on to concept development. That in turn will inform you further as to how to change the idea, possibly to then move on to the next stage. Or what you might find is you'll get to prototyping and testing, and the materials that you have available to you don't work the way in which you need them to for the concept of the idea to work or be delivered in a way in which you like them to. And that will take you back to ideation or concept developing, or even look at developing a type of material that best suited for what it is that you needed to do. We go to the next slide. There we go. It's important to note that there are 2 elements that run through this whole process. The first one being time, and the second one being funding. Both of these elements are often underestimated and come quite late in a project. Now, I can't stress to you enough that both of these elements are pivotal to the success of any idea campaign or any development of anything, whether it relates to just a simple service improvements or service delivery structure. The time and funding of each of these phases do vary, and these are things that should be adopted or entered in at a very early stage. Funding, there are various streams that you can look at. Some that I would suggest is possibly looking at the universities to see what resources they have. The Scottish Enterprise, there is also Angel Investment, and also Scottish Health Innovations, who are partners within this collaborative workforce, and I'm sure we'll hear from them a bit later on today. So what was the problem, and how did the idea evolve? Next slide. The equipment for pre-hospital emergency anesthesia is carried within these 2 bags. The top bag that you can see is the drugs, and the bag at the bottom is the equipment. Now, to prepare for an emergency anesthesia, if we go to the next slide, we set up a kit dump. Now, this is laying out equipment on a clinical waste bag, as you can see in front of you, which is a well-described method in the literature for preparing for emergency anesthesia. However, the problem with this is that it's vulnerable to the elements. Next slide, please. This is something that I came to realize very quickly early on in my career within the air ambulance division, where I set up a pristine kit dump. It was great. A patient arrived, and next thing, a gust of wind came and just lifted the whole kit dump up and threw all of the kit into a field. Now, we ended up running around trying to find another tube, another laryngoscope, and perform the intervention. Fortunately, the patient was in a condition such that it didn't impact them anyway, but it did stress the whole team. If we go to the next slide, please. The other problem that we have is that sometimes we might need to move from one location to the other because the environment changes. In this example, we had set up for an emergency anesthesia, and next thing we found was this collie around our ankles trying to herd us in another direction. And little did we know was that a farmer in another field was driving his sheep towards us. Now, the farmer didn't know that we were there, and we didn't know that this is what was going to happen. The event just occurred. And what happened was that we had to take all of the kit that you see in front of you, put it into a bag, hoping that we didn't drop anything with the collie running around our ankles, and move to another location. Now, this procedure is a high-risk procedure, and the risk of error in these types of circumstances becomes quite extreme. So this is why I felt that there had got to be a better way of doing this. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So that's where I came up with the idea of what about developing a kit dump in a bag? And what I mean by this is all the equipment and drugs would be pre-prepared in the bag, ready to go. All that we would need to do then is just simply open it up. There was no setting it up on an orange clinical waste bag, no worrying about trying to collect stuff. It would just simply all be in one place, ready to go. But we didn't want to create just another airway bag that carried and stored stuff. There's lots of them on the market. It needed to add value. So the big question was, how would we identify this? And what did we need to do to make that work? Next slide, please. So using the concept of aggregation of marginal gains, which is used by high performance teams, whereby they break down each intervention down to its smallest component and to identify areas where they could save time. Those small gains all added up together contribute to a much bigger gain. And what we found was, next slide, please. The key area where most of the gains could be made was during the preparation phase of emergency anesthesia. Now, the aim for this was it needed to be clinically meaningful. And what we mean by this is it needed to reduce time, reduce error, and reduce cognitive load. And collectively, this is where the value in the idea lies. Next slide. If we look at performance over time since implementing the new process, as users learn the new process, there's a slow improvement in performance. Then there's a steady improvements can be seen as users adopt the process and get more familiar with it by seeing a reduction in time and reduction in error. Next slide, please. So how can we further enhance performance? Because what happens is that once users get to a point of performance of the skill, there's a plateau that occurs. What we can do is we can engineer process improvement that reduces cognitive load into the design. And in doing so, the design itself becomes a useful offloading tool to reduce the cognitive burden, thereby improving performance further. And that's where the concept of SCRAM was born. SCRAM stands for Structured Critical Airway Management and is there to enhance the performance of emergency airway management by reducing the time to intervention, reducing error, and reducing cognitive load. Next slide, please. So it is a great idea, 90% of the work needed to develop a product. And what I would say is that a great idea is a great idea. The work is still needed to actually put the product together. Next slide. A lot goes on between a great idea and the craftsmanship of its development, and that's where the magic lies. And what I'd like to do next is just to run through a little example or a little exercise to demonstrate to you what I mean by this. So this is one of the decisions that we needed to make, and what I'd like for yourselves to do is to decide which option would you have gone with, option 1, option 2, option 3. And what we're deciding here is which color scheme would be the best to adopt. If you guys wanted to put down in the chat as to which one you would choose now, option 1, option 2, option 3, that would be great. I'll hang fire until you guys try and make some choice.
Yeah, it's in the Q&A. Just feel free to put a comment in, and we'll share what the consensus is.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, we can keep going while the audience put this in, and we can come back to it if you like.
Okay, right. So what I'll do is just crack on with the reasoning behind it. For those of you who have already commented, the option 2, the reason why option 2 is not the best option to go with is because of color prioritization. If you look at the 3 examples in front of you and ask yourself the question, which one did you see first? And the one you saw first was for 2 reasons. One, it's in the middle of the screen, and the other one is the yellow on black. Your eye is drawn to the yellow on black, and that means giving that particular item or object higher priority. Now, this choice, the reasoning behind why I'm asking you this question is the magic lies between the decisions of how the craftsmanship and how the bag is put together. Each of those tubes that you can see in front of you, so size 6, 5.5, 4.5, 4, these numbers down the side relate to the size of endotracheal tube. The importance of this is we need the correct size of tube. We don't need to highlight which tube is there. And in a situation where it is a high stress environment, what you'll find is you are drawn to using gross motor indicators, and that means your eye is drawn to yellow items rather than a blended one where you'd have to physically go in and identify which tube you actually want. So in a situation where you have a high stress environment, you tend to lean on gross motor indicators, which is things like color, things of less text, and you would likely choose the incorrect size tube using option 2 as opposed to option 1 or 3. For our design, we went with option 1 purely because it blended in quite a lot nicer with the 3 components, not creating any priority between each of the elements. So we move on to the next slide.
Yeah, most of the chat, Paul, people did choose option 2. I don't know if they cheated because they heard you saying it, but there was a few honest people out there that said option 3. So
yes. So again, a lot of people do choose option 2, and the reason for showing this slide is that when we talk about is a great idea 90% of the work done? Well, a great idea is a great idea and is a big part of what's needed. But the insight knowledge that the person has who develops the idea has this core knowledge as to why things have to be a certain way, and that idea evolution and design within the product is something that stays with the product and moves with the design process. So when we go back to the original slide of how long something takes, from idea through to commercialization, this is a journey and not just a one event. I've had an idea, I'm going to pass it on to a company and wash my hands with it. Unfortunately, those days don't happen. A good idea needs nurturing needs input and feedback from other resources. So if we move on to the strategy, we identified that these were the key areas as to where Scrum would likely benefit. So the pre-hospital, military, sports, and within the hospital environment. We knew that the adult and pediatric cohorts of patients would benefit from that. So if we move to the next slide. We chose to focus on the pre-hospital and adult cohorts. And the reason being is that is where I primarily work and where I could get the most exposure of the idea within a live environment. So I could get a lot of movement and feedback from the design and development and feed that back into the design and philosophy of Scrum. However, what we found was through organic growth, Scrum found its way within the other communities itself. We didn't have to do very much work for it to find its way within the other fields. And very soon after, what we found was the community came to us to say, could you please design and develop a pediatric version of Scrum using the same philosophy to be used in both the pre-hospital and hospital environments. We listened to what the community had to say and developed a pediatric version. Prototyping and testing is an important component of Scrum and is fundamental to the ongoing development. What you can see in the top left is the first prototype. And, you know, when I have discussions with people as to, you know, how do we get to prototyping? Well, this bag that you can see in front of you is put together with bits of Velcro, bits of tape, and some handheld sutures. And it was a mock-up that we put together. It was trialed through simulation, where we tweaked the design to a stage whereby we were happy with, and then we put it into live testing. This was in a controlled environment where, and what I mean by that is only a select core of people who were familiar with the bag, familiar with the setup, tested it until we were happy with the design and moved on to contacting Scottish Health Innovations, who helped us take it from the first prototype to the version 1 of Scrum, which is the first commercial product. That's moved on. We now work with Open House Products and SHIL. Open House Products are the manufacturer of the whole Scrum line, and Scottish Health Innovations help support the project. We are now in version 2 of the adult Scrum, and this is through ongoing feedback from the users, that being the community, the manufacturer, i.e. how the material has changed and the types of solutions that we can now implement within the bag to reduce the cognitive burden and make it easier to use are all fundamental to the strategy of Scrum. Next slide. Research and community feedback, as I mentioned, are pivotal. So, and this takes us to, does Scrum have a clinically meaningful impact to emergency anesthesia? And that was the original aim, was it needed to have a clinically meaningful impact. Move on to the next slide. So we've conducted 2 studies so far. There's a 3rd study underway. This first one reviewed the impact of drug and equipment preparation on pre-hospital emergency anesthesia, that being pre-prepared equipment and drugs compared to standard practice. And what we found was clinicians using Scrum, there was a reduction in intervention time. And what I mean by intervention time, this is from the decision to perform the intervention to completion. There was a reduction in error and a reduction in cognitive load. Let's put some numbers to that. So intervention time, again, so intervention time was from the decision to perform it to completion was reduced by just over 9 minutes. There were fewer errors and cognitive load was reduced. Now let's go on to the next slide and talk a little bit about the cognitive load. Apologies for how this slide has turned out. I'm not sure if it's the team sharing or what, but the image on the left is the control, and the image on the right is the experimental arm. And what I mean by the experimental arm, that was Scram, the Scram system compared to standard practice. And what you can see is the distribution of the data that suggests that the workflow within the experimental arm was improved compared to standard practice. The next slide. The second study was done at the Royal London, where we had anaesthetists who were blinded to the Scram, comparing standard practice being resuscitation trolley to the Scram. Now, none of the anaesthetists had seen or played with the Scram bag before. It was a blinded trial, and the clinicians who used Scram in this particular study, there was a reduction in intervention time by 29%. There was an 87.5 reduction in absolute error of omission. And if you go to the next one, cognitive load, which is quite interesting, was also reduced. Now, the reason why I say this is quite interesting is because clinicians were using Scram for the first time, comparing to a system that they were very familiar with, resuscitation trolley, and 67% of them reported that they felt Scram easier to use than the very familiar resuscitation trolley. Next slide, please. Currently, we're conducting research at the Edinburgh Sick Children's Hospital, where we're comparing standard practice to pediatric Scram using eye tracking technology to determine intervention time, error, and particularly cognitive load, to have a bit more of an objective view as to what how Scram is impacting the early stages of pediatric airway management. Now, commercialization and market strategy, there are two general approaches that we could have chosen. One being the global launch, which gains market presence, gains economies, but it's expensive and there's a high cost of failure. Alternatively, there is a limited launch. Next slide, please. Which has a minimum cost, organic. It's grown through organic growth, and the problem with that is it actually allows competitors to catch up. Now, Scram was originally released to the Emergency Medical Retrieval Service in Glasgow, and through organic growth is currently being used for advanced airway management by high-performance teams in both the pre-hospital and hospital environments in the UK and other parts of the world, with distributors in the UK, Australia, the USA, and soon Middle East and Canada. So limited launch has worked for us. In this slide, we're showing you the portfolio. It now extends to 6 different products. Next slide 23, please. Yep, perfect. We extend to 6 different products across and they cover across the spectrum of age. I have been collaborating with a Professor Scott Weingard, who is an ED intensivist in New York, to bring 2 new co-branded products. These are planned for launch early this year. Dr. Weingard is an ED intensivist from New York. He has a fellowship in trauma, surgical, critical care, and ECMO. He's also best known for his podcast on resuscitation and ED critical care, called the EM Crit podcast, which has been downloaded over 20 million times. So there's an important factor here within how we've grown, in that collaboration is important to consider when moving either your brand, partnering with people that add so much value to what it is that you're trying to deliver. The fog of innovation is something I like to talk about, and these are just some examples that I've experienced. and you will experience, no doubt, through your innovation or entrepreneurial journey. The first one being a lack of organizational structural insight to innovation. Isolation and support is really a common theme, and to remember that doing this in isolation or a lack of support is a recipe for disaster. Find the support. You're not alone, and if you are alone, get in touch with me or get in touch with your tutors who would be able to help point you in the right direction. Being too busy, and what I mean by that is either the organization's too busy to capture ideas. You might be too busy, particularly now given COVID. It's okay to be too busy, but remember that you may need to come back to it at some point or another. Otherwise, ideas stagnate. Complexity. If things are too complex, do they need to be? Because often the simpler answers are the easiest solution. When things start to become complex, ask yourself why. Why are they becoming complex, and do they really need to be? Because once things start to become too complex, the challenge of actually getting over that hurdle can actually be quite extreme and costly, from not only from a financial perspective, but from a time perspective. The critics. I love these. The critics, many people worry about the critics, but you know what? The critics can actually give you a level of insight that you don't see because of your own personal biases to the idea, or you're too close to it. Listen to what the critics have to say, and have a look objectively as to what your idea is, because they may have a really good point that you haven't seen and may put you down a road that will give you more insight and improve the product outcome. A lack of motivation and drive is something that I think goes hand in hand with being too busy, and especially now during the COVID times where there's not enough fuel in the tank. Give yourself some time, recuperate, and then get on the bike again and drive yourself forward within teams that are motivated and charismatic. That rubs off on you. Lack of investment, and what I mean by that is lack of investment of time, finance, and support. And we've covered that in the previous statements. The ability to articulate value. This is a very big one, and I think in the early stages of any idea, it's very difficult to articulate the true value of a young idea. And it's only once the idea matures do the abilities of being able to articulate the true value that it's able to offer. One way that really helps to articulate that within Scrum is the research that supports it. And I think that's one of the things that many new ideas struggle with, is where is the research that supports the idea to say that what we are doing or what we propose we are doing is actually valid. And then just keep in mind, things take longer than expected. So just give you a few 5 key take-home points. So the first one, the idea is a small but essential part of a bigger picture. Without it, you don't have anything to move forward on. Number 2, trust your vision, but review ongoing feedback. And that feedback is from peers, it's from research, it's from users, it's from the manufacturer. As many feeds into your vision, these feeds are vital to help either support it, change its direction, or nurture it. Number 3, prolific beats perfect. And what I mean by this is, don't wait for something to be perfect before releasing it, because the feedback that you get from users or from any of the sources that provide you with feedback might help you change your idea or the concept in a dramatic way. So get papers out there, get the research out there, get the idea moving forward. Don't wait for it to be 100% perfect. put yourself in a highly motivated environment. And the reason for that is these highly motivated environments, they rub off on you, and the amount of work that you're able to produce is phenomenal compared to sitting at home in front of a desk by yourself all the time. It can be very challenging. You get what you pitch for, and you're always pitching. And this is an important thing to try and work on, is that pitching an idea doesn't come easy, it's not natural to everyone, and work on it. Stand in front of a mirror and just remember that regardless of who you are talking to, you're always pitching. A bonus point is, how can you partner or collaborate with other businesses or take your idea to the next level? Now, Scrum is a product that does give back to the NHS, and the reason for that is the revenue stream that it's linked in with. Scrum is supported by Scottish Health Innovations, and through their revenue streams, a proportion comes back to the inventor, a proportion goes to the health service, and these structures vary depending on where you work. A point to note with working with Scottish Health Innovations is that it's allowed me to develop the idea, but to a commercial level, where I now have up and coming 9 products, but also be a clinician. And this is something that is not easy to do in many circumstances, because it's either one or the other. And don't get me wrong, this is like having 2 jobs, but the feedback that I get from clinicians who are actually using Scrum is phenomenal. Next slide. So if you had any questions, I'll be free to answer any of them, but thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was a fantastic overview of an amazing journey. And this is Paul's details there, paulswinton.com. And we can contact him or follow him on Twitter, CA Swinton. I'll just get this down. And thank you for bearing with us, audience and Paul, with a slight delay. I was trying my best to time Paul's talk. It's just a scene just with Mark, if that place down. So hope that was okay for everyone. But as I said, a really inspirational journey that Paul's been on. You could tell he's dedicated. You know, it's separate to his day-to-day job, and he didn't want to give up his day-to-day job because that's his passion for him as well, and he's obviously very good at it. I'm going to bring in Linda in a minute. I just want to ask a couple of questions first, Paul. So, you know, that was an amazing journey. Could you talk just a little bit about your upbringing and before you even got into all of this? Did you ever think you could be like? Do you consider yourself an entrepreneur? Was there anything in your back of your mind or anything growing up that kind of pushed you in this direction, or thought you might say you could do this in the future?
As I'm sure you can tell from my accent, I'm not local to Scotland. I'm from South Africa. I grew up in South Africa, did all my training and development in South Africa, and only in early 2000s did I come over to the UK. Throughout the time, I think, you know, growing up, I was always one that liked to think of different ways of doing things. But never thought of myself of being able to develop something that would turn into a product that's been used around the world by you know, high performance teams, and even collaborating with experts in the field. You know, that's something that I never thought was possible. But the message is that it's not a destination. It's a journey that you grow into and that you develop, and the skills that you learn along the way you may not have at the time, but there are people out there who can support you and provide you with the right direction to develop those skills further. And you know, Scrum originally, like I said, was just designed for our team. And the thing is that the idea grew from there, and it needs persistence, it needs drive. And without the persistence, without the drive, Scrum wouldn't be what it is today. Without the inclusion and the recognition of the community that help and support Scrum through their feedback and ongoing development, Scrum wouldn't be what it is today. So again, it's not a silo, it's one of collaboration and working to your strengths. And where you don't have a strengths, find someone who does. The bottom line being is that, you know, if your project or your idea needs somebody with a PhD, it doesn't mean you need to go out and get a PhD yourself. There are loads of people who have PhDs out there. Why not collaborate with them? Why not, you know, co-invent something and join the expertise? That's far more powerful than trying to do it by yourself.
Thank you. It's really, really important about collaborating, like you say, and having that open-mindedness. And today's talk is in partnership with SHIL, so I can see it's been a huge part of your journey. I was going to, just before I pass on to Linda, ask about IP or intellectual property. So, you know, did you have an awareness of intellectual property when you started to create this, design this for your team, first and foremost? And then how was it handled, like going forward, like in order to commercialize it? Was it an important aspect of the journey?
So intellectual property is a topic or is a session all on its own, and it has many facets. Although from just using my experience, I didn't know much. I knew that intellectual property existed, but I didn't know much about the rules and regulations thereof. And it wasn't. It was when I went to Scottish Health Innovations, they were the ones that helped direct me, you know, and support the Scrum idea in that particular way. But what I would suggest is that if you are considering, you know, an idea or do have something, speak to trusted people. Don't go and put it all over the internet, because somebody will take the idea and run with it, especially if it's good. And there are streams that are able to support you with developing that idea and the intellectual property thereof. Now, in regards to Scrum, Scrum is currently within the health service. That's why we get a kickback through the product development. So some proportion of the revenue goes back to the Scottish Ambulance Service, and it is quite a nice thing to think about, that something that was developed within the health service is capable of bringing revenue back to the health service. So those concepts and the way in which IP is protected. Number one, you speak to an expert in regards to intellectual property, so you have the right advice. And number two, there are many ways as to how to split and share the revenue between the health service and yourselves. It's something that can be explored, and I think the limits are your imagination.
Mm-hmm. And do you think it was how would you communicate or encourage people who do have an idea? Think of all the ideas, like you said, that are just ideas that would never go forward. Someone listened today and has had an idea for a while, an innovation, and it's, this sounds great, but it can't be me. I don't have these skills, or I don't have the determination. They're kind of making excuses. What could you say to them to say, be brave?
I was that guy. I was that guy who had that idea, who worked, who didn't think it could go anywhere, who didn't know how to take it anywhere because the information out there was scarce. Nowadays, there's more information than there ever was before. There are various streams that you can go through. I'm not trying to be biased in any way, but I'll just run through a few suggestions. The universities generally have pathways to help and support students within the health service, or within Scotland at least. There's Scottish Enterprise, or within the health service there is companies like Scottish Health Innovations who are able to support you with that journey. So there are many ways to actually get the idea off the ground, but the first step is yours. And you know, the worst idea is the one that we never acted upon, because the one that sat in a box, and one day that idea you probably find, you think, I thought of that a couple of years ago, and you know, didn't act upon it. So if you have an idea, share it with somebody that you trust, or have a chat with somebody that you trust, or even better, why not collaborate with somebody who has a mutual interest? It doesn't just have to be yours, because there will come a time during that journey whereby you need a little bit of a rest, and you need somebody else to help carry the baton for you. With Scram, my original partner was a chap by the name of Neil Sinclair. He's now one of the associate directors in one of the Irish ambulance services. And with pediatric Scram is Dr. John McCormack. So for my example, I am quite okay to partner with people who are willing to carry the can and are credible. And I just think there's so much value in collaborating with people to help you get to where you need to be.
I think that's a really good point. It's really hard to start a business or bring a product forward to market on your own. And that's one of the things that people are scared of. So yeah, if you're doing it with other people, it's much easier. And just make sure you're all aligned and it can work well as a team. We've got room for audience questions, so please put them in the chat, and we'll come to them very soon. But I'm going to pass over Linda from School of Health Sciences. And Linda, we've known each other a long time, and you've always been interested in a kind of design, innovation, design thinking. And I think this is a lot what Paul has done on his journey, and I think he does realise now, but it was very organic. Could you make some comments and have some questions on behalf of the school and how they could take inspiration from today's talk?
Yeah, Brian, I think one of the things that's really struck me as you were speaking, Paul, was the emphasis you put on collaboration and on interdisciplinarity. And these are things that we really try in our programs of study to get the message across to students. And indeed, we work with Brian in the Centre for Entrepreneurship and putting on some events every year. I mean, it struck me, I was surprised, but I shouldn't have been, that you brought in sports performance theory and like behavioural psychology, and these all dovetailed in. And it made me wonder, you know, in terms of busy healthcare professionals, I can see, you know, you're working away. How do we encourage, you know, those people at the front line to take these ideas forward? I mean, what can we do to make those collaborations in the workplace come together and actually move ideas forward?
Well, we do that all the time. So if you think about it, let's just take a simple example of the mess room, or where lots of chat happens. You know, something will happen during the day, someone will have an idea, and it'll just be a light chat about, you know, we think that this could have been done different, or this is a pinch point, and I think if we do X, Y, Z, that would enhance the way in which we do things. And then what happens? We either go and speak to a disengaged manager, or we go and speak to a critic, or we go and speak to somebody who puts a whole bucket of water on that spark, that initial spark or idea, and automatically you think that there's not much to go on with this. And I think there's a lot of importance in, number one, how to capture the idea. And we all have ideas every single day, but we don't know which of those ideas are going to be the Amazons, the Googles, the Microsofts or the Apples. And if we did, we would simply focus all of our efforts on those particular ones, and hey presto, we've got a successful business. So how do we capture these ideas in a structured way and develop them further? And one of the things that I would suggest is cast your net wide. If you're in an organization, you cast your net wide and you record all of these ideas that come through. And by recording all of the ideas, you're capturing them, but you're also assigning them to the person who it originates from. So you are providing a level of trust. And I think ideation, innovation, and trust are fundamental to fundamental foundation to the building blocks. And what we need to do then is prioritize which idea should we be focusing on, and that prioritization comes with working with the clinician or the innovator themselves and asking them, what benefits does this idea, is this idea an Apple? Is this idea a Microsoft? It might be, but you don't know. And how much time and effort do we invest in that? And that's achieved by not going to one single point, but that idea is captured by a team who then support and put the appropriate network around that particular person to then help them to the next level of ideation and creativity. That at the moment is full of holes, and that's why people have a chat in the mess room and the idea disappears, because they don't feel empowered. They don't feel that they don't know who to go to. A nurse might be sitting in a mess room. He might be on this chat right now. He may have had an idea this morning, spoken to someone, and they don't know who to go to. And those pinch points within a system are things that don't help. They actually can stifle ideas. So I think, in summary, a method from a system perspective, a method to be able to capture the ideas, a trustable team to work with the inventor, who support the inventor and recognize them as such, and the appropriate remuneration thereof, because all of that is part of a business. People don't do this for free. And if they do it for free, bless them, because it's a lot of hard work, a lot of personal time, and it's not an easy journey.
Yeah, I can believe that. In terms of keeping you going, you talked about it, about innovation not being a linear process. So going back to that, your first scam bag, when the fog of innovation descended, what kept you going?
The frustration on the experience, the real world experience of not wanting to experience another day of my kit dump flying away and a properly sick patient coming to where I needed to perform an intervention. I didn't want to experience that again. It was a real experience. It was something that that not just me, but other clinicians resonated with, not just here in Scotland, but elsewhere in the world. And this is a problem that, the generalizability of what I'm talking about is that some of the ideas that you might come up with may be something that many people identify with. There's one of my colleagues, she has invented a PAT slide with a scale built into it. And it's doing extremely well because the pinch point in that particular thing is experienced by clinicians everywhere, whereby we need to get the weight of our patient and we need to move patients. She's combined both into a product, and it's doing very well. And Gillian is, she's working really hard on it. So, that's just an example of many that are out there.
Thank you. Brian, should I come back to you? Are there other questions, people waiting to ask questions?
Yeah, thank you, Linda. And there's been quite a lot of comments and questions, so I'm just going to go through them, Paul, so you can see them. Somebody said option one was my choice, honestly. So there is an extra one. 9 minutes is a huge improvement. Wow. Really interesting. Thank you. Oh, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so just to give you a bit of perspective, the control arm when preparing for emergency anesthesia, so setting up the drugs, setting up all the equipment, on average, it was taking about 20 minutes to prepare, and then perform the intervention. So from decision to completion was taking about 20 minutes, and we've taken just over 9 minutes off that.
Amazing. You think about the difference that could make. Really interesting. Thank you. Amazing. Did you find that the original circle of people you pitched to were highly receptive? Did they have early buy-in, or did they change their minds as time went on?
So this is a bit of human nature. We will never, if we have an idea, the likelihood of you going to somebody in your community that is going to say no, it's a terrible idea, is pretty small. Generally speaking, if we have an idea that we think is pretty good, we'd confine to close friends and we'd talk about it with close friends. That's human nature, and our friends will be very supportive, and some of them will tell you what they think you want to hear, and some of them will be very objective, and the objectiveness is what you're looking for initially, just to nurture it, just to try and help it along the way, because in the early stages of an idea, it's very easy for that spark to get blown out. And about 3-4 months later, somebody else has had the similar pinch point, similar idea, and all of a sudden they're running with it.
Totally. Thank you very much. This was really interesting and useful from Morag. RP, could Paul please say some more about cognitive load as it relates to user elements of stress, etc.? Not sure what exactly constitutes the terms fully.
Okay, so cognitive load is the amount of processes that you need to work through during any given time. So if you think about, let's just, if we can cast our minds back to the days of learning how to drive, compared to if you are a long-term driver now. If you remember when you had your instructor sitting next to you, you were driving quite fine in the rural back roads. You felt no problem whatsoever. You could indicate, you could brake, you could stop, no problem. You could change gears, no problem. Then all of a sudden, you end up going towards the on-ramp of a motorway. You know how to do all this stuff. You know how to change gears. You know how to indicate. But if you recall back to the first time that you went onto the on-ramp of a motorway, your stress levels and anxiety went up dramatically purely because of the stress that you were feeling at that point and the what-ifs that your head was putting you through. It didn't mean that you didn't have the ability to do it. It just meant that the cognitive bandwidth that you were experiencing at that time was starting to max you out. And that cognitive bandwidth meant that you looking into your blind spot was missed, and the risk of running into another car, because you've forgotten to think about that. And the reason why you've forgotten to think about that was because you were overworked. Your brain was trying to work on too many things. Now, there is a law called Hick's law, where the amount of decisions that we need to make in any given time increase our cognitive load logarithmically. And this is something that is, again, a good example of is if you imagine a learner driver approaching an accident scene, what do they need to do? How do they change gears? They get stressed out. Whereas a person who has been driving for a long period of time, they're more able to navigate that particular event with ease. And that's just a real life example of how cognitive load can actually impact us and also inject errors into something that we are able to do without thinking, i.e. driving.
A good point. And what's your thoughts on artificial intelligence and how it could impact the health service? And, are you for it? Because that would certainly limit some of the cognitive load issues that some people face. I know a lot of people are scared of robots and that side of things.
So I think there is definitely a place for AI and definitely a place for robot technology and the like, because there's a lot of day-to-day tasks that humans do that could be taken over by robots. Absolutely no problem. There's even a lot of complex tasks that could be supported and work synergistically. For instance, the robotic, the aided theatre placements that are currently taking place within Scotland, they work quite well. And I think the barrier to that acceptance is the unknown, is the risk of error, the risk of something going wrong. However, these elements that we are able to then offload, so in other words, if you tell a robot that it needs to do X and that's all it needs to do, and it will repeat it the same time and time again, a human can't compete with that. But the scary thing comes in as to what if we get them to do things that hasn't been tested very well. And I don't believe that medicine or even health sector would allow for something to be in place without the appropriate testing and validation streams within there. It's a very rigorous process that one needs to go through to allow that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definite room for it, and but we're always going to need the human side of things, and like testing for input and feature changes, and of course, human relationships will always be required.
I mean, here's a good example. If we refer back to Scrum, so currently, if we need to do a aerosol, if we need to intubate a patient who has COVID, it's a aerosolized a procedure whereby we all need to wear PPE. We all need to wear, you've seen it on the television, the amount of stuff that clinicians need to wear to prepare for that particular patient. Now, not only that, we then still need to think about all of the kit that we now need to, we need to get all of our laryngoscopes or all of our airway kit ready for the procedure. We now need to don all of our kit to make sure that we aren't exposed to COVID. What Scrum does, Scrum takes away the worry about what kits are having ready. The kit is there in a bag. So from a cognitive load perspective, I don't have to think about it, because I know that just by grabbing Scrum, everything that I could need is in there, ready to go. And that's another example of a cognitive offload that allows you to then focus on other jobs rather than being maxed out.
Yeah, and I think that's been evident throughout how it's important to make life easier for people when doing anything, particularly critical tasks. Listen, Paul, this has been fantastic. I hope and I know that there'll be people today watching that will be really inspired with this, and maybe they're going to get a little bit closer to try to take that idea forward now. I loved your kind of statement about the worst ideas are the ones not acted upon. I think that's a brilliant quote there. So a huge thank you, and I think you'd be happy for people to reach out to you on your website or social media if they want to get in touch for a chat.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on Twitter or through my website, whichever. Get in touch. Happy to have a chat, and we can take things from there.
Thank you, Paul. Fantastic. And what a great talk to kind of really kick off Entrepreneurship Week. We've got one more event later on today, and we've got a week of events, which I'm going to pass on to Joanna to take you all through. But a huge thanks once again, Paul, and also to SHIL, who helped make this happen today, who again, anybody who works in the health service or within the university related to health and medicine and so on can get in touch with if they've got an innovation. And again, we could share those introductions to contact us as well. And the university, of course. We've got a lot of expertise here if anybody needs help with an idea. One of the best medical schools in the world and health sciences department. And yes, so please get in touch. I'm going to pass on to Joanna, if you could just summarise your thoughts from a student perspective on today's talk, and then maybe go through what we've got left this week and encourage people to attend for Entrepreneurship Week. Thank you.
Yep. Well, thank you very much again, Paul, for such an amazing masterclass. That was very inspirational. And as a student, I think it's very important to understand that you can have both at the same time. You can have a career and be an entrepreneur as well, despite the challenges that it implies. But I think as a student, it's very important to know that, and whilst deciding what you want to do after you graduate. So as I mentioned at the start, this event is part of Entrepreneurship Week 2021, and we have a series of workshops, which you can see in red here, going on throughout the week. You can still sign up to these on either our website or on Eventbrite. And just to point out two of the main events that we have is the annual public lecture with Joanna Basford. And this is on Wednesday from 6 to 7:30. And then we also have the venture competition final on Friday from 4 to 6 rather. And these are both very inspiring events as well. And it's always lovely to see the businesses that students and staff present at the venture competition, and to hear more about inspiring people in the field, such as Paul and Joanna, who will be speaking on Wednesday. Thank you all very much for attending, and thank you, Paul, once again.
Thank you.